Warning: Geeking Toyetic is a show aimed at the adult collector, and as such features adult language and humor that is not appropriate for younger audiences. Viewer discretion advised.
Hey everybody, what's going on? How are you doing out there? Can you hear me out there? Let me know if you can hear me. Or if there's an echo of any sort. So. Okay, well, seems like it's all right. Like we're ready to go. All right, I'm just going to go with it. All right, how's it going, everybody? Welcome to Geeking Poetic Podcast channel. I'm your host, Larry Roberts, and I am here to do another episode. If you can't tell by looking at the screen, it is Geeking Toyetic. Yes, I am the resident toy geek here at Geeking Poetic channel, and I just thought it'd be kind of cool to do a Toyetic. It's been a little while since we've put anything out there for you guys to check out. So, I've been obviously in a summery mood because we're in the thick of summer right now. Although it doesn't feel as summery around here in Chicagoland as I would like it to feel. I'm sick of rain. I'm sick of clouds and overcast. I want heat and sunshine and frolicking on the beach and all of that kind of fun stuff. But no, clouds follow me everywhere. And it has my whole life, which is why I spent so much of my childhood sitting inside the house playing with toys. And playing with toys is something that I very fondly remember from the summer of 1982. Now, that's not to say I didn't get out to the beach and went down to Kentucky to go hang out and have fun on my houseboat that my family had and all that kind of stuff, which that's surprisingly enough, Mom is in the chat and she said, "Hi, just crossed into Kentucky." So how timely. And Chuck's here. Hey, what's going on? If there's any sound issues or video issues, please let me know. Because I'm just kind of winging it over here. So, anyway, I was saying, yeah, so, I have very, very fond memories of that particular summer. It happens to be exactly 40 years ago that the summer of 82 happened. And, besides it being just a personal thing, one of the main reasons that I wanted to talk about this particular summer is because 1982 was such a major breakout year for the 80s. I feel like the 80s, it's typical of a decade. 80 and 81, there was cool stuff that happened. Empire Strikes Back and Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark. There was Clash of the Titans. There was cool stuff, but it wasn't until 1982 that it really became super 80s-ish, I feel like. Even some of those aforementioned movies put out their iconic, fondly remembered toys and games and video games, all that kind of stuff. And there was some really, really big movies, big TV shows. A lot of really cool media came out in 1982. And as such, with that came toys. Now, why are the toys significant in 1982? Well, they're significant because prior to that, there had been a law that was, it really restricted what you could do in terms of children's toys and things like children's cartoons and stuff. They were very suspect of having cartoons out there that were based off of a toy line because they said, well, that's taking advantage of children. That's making them, that's basically giving them a half an hour commercial for the toys, yada, 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 all this stuff. They had all these restrictions about it and you couldn't do it. Well, with Reagan in office and a lot of things changed and stuff in 82, one of the things that started to be lifted was you could start having more toy and cartoon tie-ins and comic book and toy tie-ins, which was awesome because that was when a lot of the now legendary and again iconic toys and cartoons happened. That's when you had things like G.I. Joe, Real American Hero, and Masters of the Universe and He-Man and all those kind of things came out. So I just thought this was like a really prime year to talk about, and the summer seemed to really be when it just exploded. So the focus of this episode is I'm going to talk about the toys, and not just action figures, but all kinds. I'm going to focus on boys and girls toys. I don't want to not include anybody because I remember a lot of the girls toys from then too, you know. I had cousins who were girls. I had friends in the neighborhood, so I played with all of it, and a lot of it I have a lot of very fond memories of. So we're going to talk about both of that. We're also going to get into games. We're going to get into a bunch of different stuff. And I encourage any of you, if you join me here, or if you end up not watching or listening to this live and you catch this later on a replay, let me know in the comments what some of your favorite memories were of that summer. Whether it can be toys, but even if it's just certain movies, TV shows, comics, books, anything from 1982, if you remember it. I realize not everybody has the same kind of memory that I do about this kind of stuff. But if you remember it, or even if there's just certain things from that general era, early 1980s, that you want to talk about, just chip into the chat and let me know what your thoughts are. Before we're going to dive into that, though, I wanted to get into a couple of other things. There was some recent toy news that came out that I was really excited about. And they're new toys, but a couple of things that just got announced within the last week actually, in a way, ties back to this specific time that we're talking about. First off, what I'm talking about is that HasLab, which is none other than Hasbro. Hasbro have been doing this HasLab project for a couple of years now, where, to put a long story short, it's basically a crowd-funded toy. Rather than just doing a pre-sale for a new toy that's going to come out in a few months or next year or something, they're actually putting a toy out and saying, hey, this toy is going to be released or not going to be released based on your crowdfunding participation. And they usually set a goal. In this case, they set a goal of that they needed to have, I think it was 8,000 backers or eight something like that, in order for it to get made. If it doesn't reach the goal number, just like on any other crowdfunding kind of thing, it doesn't get made. There have been a couple of HasLab things that have come out or that were proposed that didn't get made, but by and large, they kind of know what us nerdy collectors want, and a lot of them have gotten made. This new one is a little bit of a retro dive back to 1982, 1983, and what I'm talking about is they announced a HasLab for G.I. Joe, Real American Hero, but it's for the Classified series. Now, I've talked about the Classified series. I have them. There's a Snake Eyes right there of the Classified series. These are modern, updated, larger versions of the classic Real American Hero figures. And they are now coming out with the HasLab version of the Cobra Hiss Tank. And what I'm talking about, let me show you right here. Yeah, there it is. So it's hard to tell scale from that photo, but it is going to be huge. And I mean, if you figure that you're looking at there, that Hiss driver guy, that guy's supposed to be somewhere around 6 or 7 inches tall. So he has to fit into that tank there, that Hiss tank. So that thing is going to be massive. It's going to be super cool. It's also quite expensive. It is $299 to fund it. But they've had no problems. It is already at like I think they had to do 8,000 to get it funded. And I think the last I looked at it, and they only just put this up like within the past week, I think it's already up over 16,000. So there is no problem with them getting this one made. It is definitely coming out. And the other cool thing that they do is with these HasLab projects that once it surpasses its initial plateau that they need to reach, for every so many thousand that it goes past, they add on more stuff. So if it gets up to like 12,000, they're going to throw another figure in there. If it gets up to 15,000, they're going to throw in a whole bunch of more accessories and all this stuff. And it's pretty neat the way they do it. I mean, granted, yeah, you're putting up $300 up front for a toy that you're not going to see for a year and a half. You know, that's a little bit of a leap of faith, and it's a tough wait for us impatient toy nerds and everything. But yeah, $300 is a lot. But considering how huge, I mean, I think honestly, if I had the thing in my hands right now and I held it up in front of the camera like this, it would take up the entire frame. It's going to be massive. As such, because of the price, but also because of the size, I'm not ordering this. I don't have $300 to put into something like this. And I don't really have the room for something like that. I have the old Hiss tank that was only like, so big with the little 3 3/4 inch guy that goes into it. I'm perfectly happy with my old one. As you know, if anybody that's watched the old episodes and listened to me talk about the classified, I love the G.I. Joe classifieds, but you got to cut it off somewhere. I can't. There's just so much stuff coming out. I just can't afford it, and I don't have the space for all of it. So I'm going to take a pass on this one, but I know there's people out there that are going to be very interested because the Cobra Hiss tank is a fan favorite. And, man, if you have the money and you have the space, good on you, because that thing's going to look cool. So if anybody thinks about ordering it, please let me know in the comments or go to the Geeking Squad group on Facebook and let us know there, because that's where we gather and and talk about all this stuff. Okay, moving on. So there is another piece of news, and again, it's related in a sense to the retro toys I'm going to be talking about shortly. Hasbro also announced that Amazon.com was going to have an exclusive retro collection 2-pack. Now, I've talked a ton about the retro collection in the past on Geeking Toyetic. This is specifically the retro versions, the reproductions of the actual vintage figures from the 70s and early 80s. I've featured it tons on here. I'm pretty sure I've talked about it. So if you want to know more about that, go watch old episodes of Geeking Toyetic and you'll find out about it. But what it is, I mean, they're literal, like almost one-to-one perfect recreations of the vintage figures that we had back in 70s and 80s. They've been met with mixed, opinions from the community, because some people don't like that they're making reproductions and feel that it hurts the values and whatever of the vintage stuff. I think the retro collection is great. I think you can tell that they're not exactly anybody that's really into the hobby and is going to be spending a lot of money on these toys ought to know the difference between the two when they see them. And if you don't know the difference, then that's your problem, man. Do some more research, because if you're going to spend that kind of money on these retro toys or on the vintage toys and everything, then you need to be able to spot reproductions. Anyway, for those of us that are really into the whole retro collection stuff and are excited to get new versions of the old figures, they have this 2-pack. I will pull it up for you now. I am super excited about this because it is 2 of my favorite figures of all time. None other than, yes, Boba Fett and Bosk. They did another, it hasn't even come out yet, and they're already announcing this 2-pack. They released for pre-sale several months ago. They released Dengar and IG-88. So clearly they've got a theme going where they're just doing 2-packs of all the Empire Strikes Back bounty hunters, which not only is that one of my favorite things, but it's a lot of nerds' favorite things. We love the bounty hunters. Bosk is one of my favorite figures. That's that silly looking guy in the yellow there on the right. And I have very fond memories of getting that. And Boba Fett, I mean, everybody knows who Boba Fett is. So anyway, these are, if you look at them, that's what you're going to get. They're going to get in a reproduction facsimile kind of package. You will be able to tell the difference definitely between the original and these reproductions. There's no way that anybody should be able to sell these and pretend that they're from 1980 or 81 or 82. If you know what you're doing, you'll be able to immediately tell the difference. But they are close enough that they bring back all the fun nostalgia for those of us that, you know, can't afford to go out and spend hundreds and hundreds and maybe thousands of dollars on the vintage versions of these toys. That 2-pack is going to cost $27.99. It just went on sale today. So if you're interested in this, I haven't looked at it in the last I don't know. I looked at it this morning, let's put it that way, and they were available, but these things are going to be limited. So if you're interested in this, depending on when you are seeing or listening to this show, I highly suggest you go check out Amazon quickly and get your order in, because these things don't tend to last very long. And, you know, $27.99 for a 2-pack like that, that's not bad. Not by today's standards, at least. I know there's people that say that should be $10 or something. Well, you know, welcome to 2022. Nothing's $10 anymore, it seems like. So anyway, that is the toy news that I have for you. And I just thought that was kind of cool and pertinent to what I'm talking about, because those are toys that I'm going to be talking about now in the next segment when we get into the summer of 1982 toys. Before I get into that, we've got some comments. I think they should lower the price if they end up with more funders than they actually needed. Yeah, I think that what they do, I think the idea is that, and rather than doing that, I think that's why they go, well, okay, for the amount of money you're spending, we'll give you a bunch of extra stuff. It gets really tricky when you have to go, okay, well, the first people that, you know, ordered it were willing to pay $2.99, but now these other people, you know, yeah, I get it. I think that's a cool idea if they would be willing to lower it for people, but yeah, that's not going to happen. I'm sure they wish they could charge even more than $2.99 for that thing if they could, but there's no way people would pay more than that. That's enough as it is. But I'm really interested to see what kind of extras they're going to throw in there with it. I'm sure they're going to throw a lot of really cool stuff in there, but it's not for me, unfortunately. I can't. If I'm going to go spend $300 on something, I'm going to go buy some old G.I. Joe toys. And I don't have the money for that right now. So anyway, without further ado, I think it's time. Should I get into the summer of 82 stuff? Yeah, because I know that's probably what most of you are logged into the show to talk about. So 82, man, where do I even start? So summer of 82, there was so many cool movies that came out. There was stuff like E.T. was out. Tron was out. There was just a load of really great movies. I think Megaforce was out. It's giving me a look like, what the hell is Megaforce? You need to see Megaforce. You'd probably like Megaforce, actually. It's pretty silly. 82 was a year, there was Road Warrior. It was the year when, like, I really feel like sci-fi and super big-time action movies really just hit their stride. You know, this was now a couple years after Empire Strikes Back came out, so there was like a deficit there of, you know, everybody was waiting to find out what was going to happen in the next chapter of Star Wars, so it was, you know, rife for things like Tron and Blade Runner and E.T. and all these movies, Poltergeist, all that kind of stuff to come out and fill that void. With that came all sorts of really cool merch and toys. Since I just mentioned it, I guess I'll talk about what was probably one of the biggest things that year, and that was E.T. toys. I mean, gosh, anybody that was around back then knows that E.T. was, pardon my language, was the shit. Like, E.T. was just a massive breakout hit. Now, that shouldn't be like a big surprise given that it was a Spielberg movie, and you know, Spielberg at that point already was considered up there amongst the top of the heap. But the funny thing is that Steven Spielberg actually looked at E.T. as being like his little pet project movie. Like, he didn't think it was going to be like the massive hit that it turned out to be. He was like, I'm going to do this. This is kind of like my little fun pet project-y kind of movie. And my God, it's freaking E.T. Like, that movie, still to this day, it's one of the most legendary movies of all time. With it came a fair amount of merchandise. There were so many like little figurines and all sorts of stuff. Like this guy here, the talking E.T. That was a really, really popular one from that time in that summer. Meg says one of our funnest spoofs to film. Every time now I see that scene, if I'm watching E.T. or I see it on a special or something and I see them with the bikes and everything, I immediately think of our little spoof video that Megan, Vito, and myself did a few years back. Look for that on our channel. It's pretty funny. Maybe I'll share it in the group again just for the heck of it. But anyway, looking at figures like this, like the talking E.T. Figure, man, that thing was so popular. I remember that just being in the neighborhood. That was just one of those, like, you have to get that toy. And it sounded really funny. The noises that thing made, it didn't sound all that great, but we loved it anyway. So yeah, E.T. was a really big one. I don't know if anybody else remembers fondly that movie, seeing it, or getting any of the toys. We'll get into things. I'm sure somebody at some point is going to make a comment about E.T., the video game. We'll get to that later. So moving on from that, another thing that was really big, it wasn't exclusive to 1982. In fact, by this point, it was starting to go towards the downslide and everything. But it was still really popular with kids around my age in 1982, especially because in 81, 82, they finally started coming out with a bunch of merchandise for this. And what I'm talking about specifically is the Dukes of Hazzard, the Dukes of Hazzard TV show. It's funny that now, and I know people get into PC political correctness stuff or whatever. I'm not going to get into any of that kind of stuff. But it's funny that the Dukes of Hazzard now is, I don't think it's looked at with the same kind of reverence or, emphasis of importance on it. That show was huge in the early 80s. I mean, that was, and especially for kids, like if you were between the ages of like 4 or 5 years old and, a teen, like you just loved Dukes of Hazzard. And Dukes of Hazzard was everywhere. It was on t-shirts, it was on dinnerware, it was on posters, and in 16 magazine and Super Teen, and you had you could even get the General Lee little pedal push car thing. But for kids my age, the thing that we loved was the little cars and the action figures. You could see them there, man. Yeah. Hey, Javier, how are you doing? He's joined us. There's a whole documentary about it. Yeah. Dukes of Hazzard. Yeah, man. I see. He liked it too. That show was just one of those ones that it just seemed to reach all across the country. It wasn't just appealing to people that lived in more rural areas. It was super popular. I mean, who didn't love seeing all the car crashes and jumping bridges and jumping this, that. I mean, and especially when you're a kid, you're all about that. That's all we did was get on our bikes and try to jump shit. It was always, let's go play Dukes of Hazzard and jump over stuff, right? Megan's even nodding her head. You were just a little toddler running around, a little 2-year-old. And even you remember from then, right? Exactly. So, yeah. And the interesting thing about this, too, is that these toys also came at the end of Mego's lifetime, because Mego did the 8-inch action figures. They did there was a few different companies that held Dukes of Hazzard licenses depending on what the toys were, but Mego was basically, but before the end of 1982, Mego would not exist anymore. And that's a whole other story that I'm going to talk about in another episode, because I've got a lot of Mego history that I have to delve into one of these days. But anyway, the Dukes of Hazzard stuff was one of the last hurrahs of Mego. And I'll talk about some other last hurrah Mego stuff later in this episode as well. But yeah, anyway, you could see there was especially the cars were the main thing, but I loved the figures. I loved the 8-inch dolls. I loved the little figures, and I loved all the Dukes of Hazzard stuff. I had a really good time playing with that stuff with not only my buddy David down the block, but also my cousin John, because he was a little younger and he was all about the Dukes of Hazzard stuff. And I just have a lot of really fond memories of us playing in Nanny's backyard with the General Lee and the little figures and making it go down. John had a slide in his backyard because he lived right next door to Nanny, and he had a slide, and we'd make the General Lee go down the slide and everything. Anyway, so a lot of fun. It's a great toy line. Obviously not something you'd see today. And for a myriad of reasons, but it was a lot of fun. It was really cool. What was so cool about that toy line too was because it had a crossover between those kids that were more enthused with cars, like kids that, I knew a lot of kids growing up that collected Hot Wheels and Matchbox and Ertl and Tonka toys, Tonka trucks, all that kind of stuff. They didn't get into like the superhero figures and stuff. And then I knew a lot of kids who loved the superheroes and the G.I. Joes and the Star Wars and Star Trek figures and didn't care about Hot Wheels. And the Dukes of Hazzard toy line like melded them both together. And that was so much fun. And it was really cool because like it was a nice bonding thing for a bunch of different kids into different stuff. So, and Javier says the intro music was da bomb. And he's not wrong. I love that. I love that song. Whenever I go down to Nashville, they've got Cooter's Museum down there, and I try to check it out when I'm down there, and I need to go check that out again. So anyway, all right, moving on from that. Another thing I'm going to talk about, since I was just talking about Mego. Now, this is a little bit of a sleeper, I guess. I'm sure a lot of you aren't going to remember this toy line, but this was a toy line that was out in '82 that I saw and I was really, really enthused about. And I only knew a couple of kids who bought any of these besides me, and thankfully they were my close buddies, Dave and Robbie. But these toys still to this day really fly under the radar, and I think that they're underrated. And what I'm talking about is the truly the last thing that Mego did. And no, I'm not talking about their clown around figures. We're not going to get into those things. The last thing that they did was they, in some ways, almost kind of beat Hasbro to the punch with small-sized action figures of military guys, because they came out with a line that was known as Eagle Force. And as you could see, there's the lineup of the guys and gals and everybody. It was similar idea as the G.I. Joes. Very comic booky. They had their own little comic kind of strips that came with them. And Captain Eagle was the leader, and there was all different specialists in this group, and they fought against a villainous team, much like Cobra. I actually have some here, in fact. Give me a second, and I'm going to pull them out for you. Excuse me while I whip this out. Sorry for the Blazing Saddles reference there. Yeah, I have some of these actually still in the package, Eagle Force. And yeah, I thought these things were great, but now what you notice about them, if you can tell, here, you know what? I'm going to get fancy here, and I'm going to try to put on another camera, if I have another camera. Do I not have another camera? Maybe I do. Hang on. There we go. All right. So, there we go. There's the other camera. So sorry for those that are just listening to this at home and you can't see it. Do a Google search and you'll find these things. So Eagle Force, as you can see, they were little die-cast metal characters. They're quite small. They're only, gosh, I don't know what you would say that is. Maybe about 2.5 inches tall. But they're quite detailed for small figures like that. They have like shiny gold and black detail on them. And if for people that are into, because I know there's a lot of people that don't necessarily collect action figures, but they like to collect like lead figurines, small metal military figurines and stuff like that. This was like a really cool in-between for that. And on the back of the card, you'll see, if you can see that they had like a whole comic strip that you could read that gave you background on the characters and their whole, mission and all that stuff. I absolutely adore these figures. Here's another one. This is the bazooka guy. Harley Ace Mechanic. He's got that badass beard there. But same thing, he's got his own comic strip on the back of the card. I really, really love these figures. You can find these on eBay for pretty cheap. I used to be able to find these things on eBay for like $5 a piece, man. And then in recent years, some people have started to catch on to how cool these are and get a little more nostalgic for them. And now they're a little bit more expensive, but they're still not like crazy expensive. You could probably find, Harley Ace Mechanic here. You could probably find him for like $30 or something like that on eBay. And that's in the package. And these things are, honestly, even if you're not an in the package collector and you'll want to have these things loose, I still recommend buying them in the package because they're so small and they come with very small accessories. It's hard to find these things loose with all of their accessories. So, anyway, I just thought that was a cool one. That was one of the very last things that came out from Mego, and that was a big hit with me and my friends back in the summer of 1982. We played with those a lot. And another toy that I guess I'll talk about it. I may as well get to it because it's another toy that was really, really big in the summer of 1982, as well as mostly at first because of its comic book that came out. Later in 1983 because of the cartoon, but I got to talk about G.I. Joe, a real American hero. Now, for some of us that are older, you might, of course, remember G.I. Joe from the 1960s. G.I. Joe, the 12-inch action figure, debuted in 1964 and was discontinued with the Adventure Team guys in 1976 was when the last couple of 12-inch G.I. Joes came out. There was a short-lived series of 8-inch Mego-sized G.I. Joes that came out in 77 and 78 called Super Joe that was supposed to be, go figure, space-themed. G.I. Joe in space because everything was space because of Star Wars and Close Encounters and stuff. Super Joe was one of my favorite things in the whole universe. I'm going to talk about Super Joe another time, but it did not do well, and G.I. Joe just disappeared. And military stuff kind of went out of fashion in the 70s, because of the Vietnam War and various stuff. Everybody was kind of worn out by the end of the 70s. But by the early 80s, they were ready for it to come back. And so they started coming out with Joes again, except this time, instead of Joe being a guy, he was a team. And they started coming out with 3 3/4 inch figures. Now, the one I'm holding up here, for those that cannot see, at home, or if you can't, you're listening, or you just can't see it quite good enough, I'll put the little cam on in a minute. This is Breaker, and this is the first 3 3/4 inch G.I. Joe Real American Hero that I ever got. And I got it in the summer of 1982. I got this and the motorcycle, the rapid fire motorcycle, the Ram or whatever. My grandma bought me those, and I loved it, and I drove her up the wall because it made too much noise on the kitchen linoleum floor, and I don't know what Megan's laughing at over there. What are you laughing at? It's a Ram. That's the name of the motorcycle. Oh, boy. I don't even want to know. Anyway, so the motorcycle was called the Ram. They all had nicknames. But anyway, this G.I. Joe figure is the first one I ever had. And this is a vintage one in his original package and everything. Here, I'll turn that little camera back on for you guys. Time for the close-up cam. There you go. So, yeah, you can see close-up. He's not in perfect condition, but that's okay. I love the fact that he's old, and he was the first one I ever had, and he's mine. So, yeah, so they came out with these, and these were initially, in fact, yeah, because this is a very old one. Initially, there was only 9 figures that you could get. You could see them here. And the villains, who everybody knows, whether you're into G.I. Joe, you know who Cobra is. The villains were not available at first, which was really frustrating. So I was trying to play with my Eagle Force villains against the G.I. Joe figures, but the scale was so different, it was really ridiculous. So it didn't quite work out. There was other, and they just, I mean, right away they came out with all sorts of cool stuff. I don't want to just talk about action figures. Although I do, speaking of, I was talking about Cobra. Here's a Cobra action figure. Now these started coming out a little later in 1982. This is actually on a 83 card, but I was so excited when the G.I. Joe villains started coming out later in 1982. But for the summer of 82, this guy was not around for me, so he technically doesn't count. One thing that was around that I loved to play with was I loved color forms. Do any of you guys remember the color forms set? Did you ever have a color form set, Megan? So I have here the G.I. Joe. I could put that there. The G.I. Joe color form play set. Here, I'll see if I can do the close-up. Yeah, you can kind of, yeah, you get the idea. Anyway, so color forms were something that came out in the 1970s, and it would give you a backdrop that you could put little sticky-ish kind of plastic characters on. I'll show you here so you can see. There's all these, oops, and a little booklet in there slid. But there's all these little characters, the Cobras, the Joes, and then you could stick them on this background and just make your own little, you know, your little battle scene. Instead of drawing it yourself, you could just make it with these little sticky guys. I mean, obviously, the play was a little limited, but I don't know, man. For a 9-year-old kid back in the summer of 82, I had a lot of fun with this Color Forms play set. I thought this thing was great. And they had other Color Forms play sets that came out that summer, but this is the one that I remember the most fondly. So, Megan's over here just giggling away about something. I did something stupid, but rapid firing rams. Yeah. Hey, they had goofy names for these things. What can I tell you? I had more Joes around here somewhere. I don't know what I did with them. Oh, did he fall down? Yeah, last but not least, one of the other things I got that summer, since I'm just going to show them all because I'm talking specifically about that summer, was I got this, the Heavy Artillery Laser, otherwise known as HAL. Megan thinks this is really funny. These nicknames for these things. HAL. And HAL was cool because he came with a little guy here that was the laser operator, and his name is Grand Slam. Megan is really, really entertained with this whole G.I. Joe code name thing. That's his name. It's Grand Slam. His real name, if you look according to his card here, it says his actual name is James J. Barney. So his first name and his last name are a first name. And he was from Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. But anyway, my grandma, my mom's mom, got me that figure I was showing a moment ago and the Ram motorcycle. And my other grandmother, who I call Nanny, got me this one. And I remember it clear as a bell. Back in the summer of '82, went to KB over in Evergreen Plaza Mall, and she bought me this. She sprung for this because this was expensive. This was like $10, which back in 1982 was a lot of money. But I had awesome grandparents that loved me, and I had a lot of fun playing with this. And then my cousin John came over, and he was excited about it, you know. And we had a good time playing with it. So I don't have actually a lot of carded or boxed vintage G.I. Joe toys compared to a lot of people. I really have a pretty small collection. But my whole thing is that I buy the ones that I have the most sentimental attachment to. I don't care about how much they're worth. I don't care whether they're in perfect condition or are getting them graded by, you know, AFA grading, blah, blah, blah. I don't care. For those of you that do, awesome. That's cool. Good on you. But for me, I just buy the ones that mean something to me sentimentally. And this is one of them. I love this toy. Had a lot of fun with this toy. And then I found out that this attached to the Jeep that came out. It had like things that you could have the Jeep, and the Jeep was called the Vamp, V-A-M-P. And that driver's name was Clutch. Clutch and Vamp, Grand Slam and Hal. So then I talked my grandfather later on in the year to getting me the Jeep so that I could tow this around, because I was really spoiled, I admit it. I had a lot of really great toys. So anyway. So yeah, G.I. Joe, that was probably, I mean, that had to be one of the biggest breakout toys of that year. Now, I don't think G.I. Joe really hit its stride with kids until 83, 84, 85, especially once the cartoon came out. That's when kids really jumped on with G.I. Joe, but I was into it right away. And I'm really glad it came out when it did, because by 1984, 85 especially, I was too old. I really wasn't into toys anymore. So there's a lot of kids who have much more fond memories of those like 84, 85, 86, later 80s G.I. Joe toys than I do. By that point, I was out of it. But these early G.I. Joes, absolutely love them. I have so many sentimental memories towards them because, summer of '82 was one of my last summers as a toy playing kid, you know. Anyway, all right. So enough about that. Moving on. What else do I want to talk about here? There's a lot of stuff that came out in '82. Well, I mentioned it earlier, so I want to talk about it. One of the biggest movies for me in the summer of '82 that I was the most excited about, and I know my buddies were as well, was the Disney movie Tron. Tron, it didn't do very well, like in terms of box office returns, and I think some of the reviews were a little bit mixed on Tron at the time. Tron now is regarded very fondly by most people, and it's recognized for being a massively influential movie in sci-fi and stuff. And man, it had a small but awesome toy line. They came out with only 4 figures. That was it. They only came out with 4 figures. Here's one of them. That's of one of the warrior guys, one of the bad guys. And it was done by a company named Tomy. I don't know if anybody remembers Tomy Toys. Tomy did a lot of, I think, more like handheld games and things like that. They weren't really an action figure company or licensor, but they did the Tron figures, and these things were cool, man. I don't have any here with me. I do have Tron toys and stuff, but they are packed away, unfortunately. I'll feature them again maybe in a future episode. But they were really cool because they were molded in a like a translucent kind of plastic. So especially if you shone light behind them and stuff, it glowed. It had that really cool effect like the characters do in the movie with that whole rotoscoping thing they did. They only came out with the 4 figures. They came out with this guy, the main bad guy, Sark. They came out with Flynn, of course, and Tron. And that's it. There was those 4 figures. That being said, man, me and my buddies had a great time playing with these things, and we had to use our imaginations a lot. There was a lot of using construction paper and tape and fluorescent lights and whatever we could do to try to replicate the whole Tron look. But the main thing that came out from Tron that we were the most excited about when it came to the action figures was they came out with the light cycles. And there it is right there. You can see there's the Tron figure with the light cycle. Man, that thing was so awesome. I can't even tell you. So the fun thing about the light cycles is they worked with a ripcord. If you ever had toys that had ripcords in it, a plastic ripcord that you'd feed through the back of it, and then you pull it out real fast, and you put the vehicle down, and it takes off like a rocket. These light cycles worked beautifully. Not only did it work great on my kitchen floor and on my basement floor and everything, I mean, it even worked out on the sidewalk, in the alley. You could jump little ramps. It was almost like a futuristic sci-fi version of an Evel Knievel cycle. And boy, oh boy, did I absolutely love my Tron toys. That was just such a highlight of that summer. So curious to know if anybody else played with Tron toys besides me back then, because again, it wasn't as popular as it could have been. Let's see what else we want to talk about. You know what? I'm talking about a lot of boys' toys. I think it's fair to start talking about a few that were mostly geared towards little girls and stuff, but that were actually a lot of fun. One of the toys that came out, this was not a new toy, but they sort of repurposed it. It had been out in the late 70s. It had been out even before that. It goes back years, but a lot of the girl toys, I notice, they do this with the boys' toys too, but I noticed that the girls' toys really seem to get repurposed with every new generation. You know what I mean? Like they're so historic in terms of how far back a lot of these, even like the stuff that's really popular now, just goes back decades. And one of the things that I remember being really popular in the summer of '82 was fashion plates. Did you have fashion plates, Megan? Yeah, she had fashion plates. So fashion plates were these really cool things. They usually came with some sort of little frame desk kind of thing. And it came with a bunch of different little plates that you could mix and match and put onto this desk. And it had raised, whatever design was on there, it was done with like a raised hard plastic. So if you went over it with a pencil or some kind of charcoal, whatever, marker, crayon, whatever it was that you would use on it, it would print out onto the paper. And it was so popular with the girls that I knew back in that summer. And I mean, I have to admit, I thought it was pretty fun too. I'd sit there, me and my buddy David, I always talk about, who watches the show sometimes, maybe he'll jump in later. You know, we would play with his little sister. He has 2 little sisters, and we had our good friend Christine across the alley, and they loved these fashion plates. And we'd sit there all afternoon, rubbing these fashion plate things, coming up with all sorts of different combinations. And later on, they must have caught on to the fact that, okay, well, little boys like this too, because then they came out with, I forget what they call them, like hero plates or something. And it was the same exact toy, but the plates were like different kinds of like Masters of the Universe looking kind of alien and barbarian characters and stuff, and which of course we thought that was super cool too. But even that being said, yeah, it was fun playing with it. Here is, just to give you an idea, here is one that came out back in 1982. This is the version they did of it then. And yeah, it came with, that's right. It came with its own set of colored pencils, all the different plates. You'd put the little pieces of paper in there. I think it's a really cool toy. And I've heard of a lot of girls that said that they played with those things like crazy when they were kids, and when they got older, they got into actual clothes designing and stuff like that. Some of them went pro. So, don't underestimate how influential a toy like that can be. I thought that was a really cool toy. Another toy that this wasn't a girl's toy. This was just anybody's toy. Any of these toys can be anybody's toy, really. But one that I think was marketed more just towards really young kids. And this was like, from what I understand, I mean, I remember it being really popular, but from reading different articles and stuff like that, from what I understand, this was like one of the number one toys of 1982 in general. And that summer was, what do you think I'm going to say? Do you know? It was none other than Glowworm. I like Glowworm. I think Glowworm's cute. But Glowworm was really, really popular, especially with the really young kids, the 6 and 7 and under ones. And significantly, not only because it was cute and it was snuggly and all that, but he glowed. He actually glowed, and that was really comforting to a lot of kids at night who, had to have a night light or something like that. I mean, what a cool idea to have not only a comforting, friendly little guy like that to snuggle with in bed, but then he also provided the comforting light that allowed kids to sleep. And this toy was a massive hit. Massive hit. I guess this thing just sold massively. And depending on what article you read and, what source and stuff, some people say that the Glowworm was possibly the number one children's toy, at least in a certain age bracket, of 1982. So I thought it'd be cool to mention that one. I can remember my buddies' little sisters running around carrying their Glowworm everywhere. Megan just typed that. Said you were jealous of your neighbor's Glowworm. Lucky you didn't steal it. Yeah, I guess they were lucky. See, Nan and Chuck, you should have got her a Glowworm. She would have liked it. Although you probably would have later on been beating your brother with it or something, right? Yep, she nods in an affirmation. You would have used it as some kind of weapon against Jason. I'm sure you would have. While we're on it, I'm going to mention another thing that debuted along with Glowworm, because this is the other thing that debuted in 1982. Started making the rounds there around the summer of 82 and everything. And boy, another one that not only was it big then, it's big today. It's another one that I was just talking about a moment ago when I was saying about toys that have that long-lasting legacy effect where it just keeps coming back and keeps coming back. One of the toys that debuted that year, and I'm sure whether you had them or not, you are familiar with them, was Hasbro's My Little Pony. Yeah, they came out with ponies in 82, and again, man, wow. They couldn't have known that was going to be as big of a hit as it was, and it has carried on. It's had so many different iterations since then. I definitely feel like there must have been a lot of kids that year that were playing with their ponies and jumped right on that. It's crazy to think that My Little Pony and G.I. Joe both debuted in 1982. Like, that's a big year for Hasbro, man. Like, shit. They're still making mega bank off of those toy lines. And summer of 82, man, they struck gold with that one. So, yeah, My Little Pony, they're cool. What a unique design to them. I mean, who doesn't love all the colors? Especially little kids loved all those different colors and stuff. Megan, you loved your ponies? Yeah, she loved, So Megan loves her ponies. And, yeah, that was a big one for the kids. But, yeah, I just thought it'd be worth mentioning that. Moving along. What else? I've got a few other things I want to... Oh, okay, we got... Oh, okay. I think that's Ange. Yeah, what's going on? A little late to the party, but I loved My Little Pony. Yeah, exactly. Little Pony was and is just still so popular. I love those toys. That's the other thing. That's what I love about talking about this stuff is like, for me, I was 9 in the summer, dating myself, right? I was 9 in, hey, Angie, I thought that was you. So I don't have my glasses on, so reading the chat is a little challenging for me. That's why I've got Megan here reading the stuff for me. Yeah, so, I was 9 in the summer of 82, and a lot of those toys, like I said, they meant so much to me. They really stuck with me, especially that year. They just really, really stuck with me. And it's so neat to see that so many of those toys from that time are now carried on to the next generation. And even the next generation, because let's face it, I'm old enough to be a grandfather at this point. And, it's really cool to see that this is carrying on and that the same toys, I mean, yeah, they might change the design a little bit. G.I. Joe figures may be a little bigger now, and the My Little Ponies might be a little bit fancier now and have a little more updated design to them, but they're still G.I. Joes. They're still ponies. They're still the same thing, really, and it's super cool to see all these new generations just totally embracing it the same way we did. And toys are not dead. Don't let anybody tell you that kids don't care about toys anymore. I hear that all the time. Little kids don't care about toys anymore. Little kids love toys. They just don't get exposed to it as much because they don't have KBs and Toys R Us's and Saturday morning cartoons with never-ending commercials of toys and stuff. But I'm telling you, kids still love toys. They love dolls. They love action figures. They love ponies. They love all that kind of stuff. So just buy your grandkids toys. They will play with it. Maybe, they love their stupid smartphones and all that shit too, but they still need to have something more tactile to play with. So I'm glad that My Little Ponies still are out there. All right, moving along. Oh, perfect timing. So we have a comment in the chat of Masters of the Universe. Yep. All right. Well, I'll talk about Masters of the Universe because you brought it up. That was another toy line that debuted as it was. We were talking about G.I. Joe debuted in 82 and My Little Pony debuted in 82. And the other one that debuted in the summer of 82 was Masters of the Universe, otherwise known as He-Man in the Masters of the Universe. Wow. Talk about a toy line that just came out of nowhere, because whereas even at least G.I. Joe had the comic book and it had the legacy of the old G.I. Joe that everybody remembered from the 70s and the 60s, He-Man came from nowhere. There was no cartoon at first. There was no comic book, and I'm not counting the little bitty comic books that came inside the figure because nobody read that unless you bought the toy, right? I remember, clear as day, I remember walking into, of all places, the Walgreens on 106th Street near my house and seeing He-Man and Teela and Skeletor and Beastman, seeing those guys for the first time. You could see them all there in the picture on the screen and going, what in the hell are these things? They looked so different. They just, didn't they say Toys R Us is coming back? We'll get into that in a minute. And yeah, because there's rumor about that. I just remember looking at these He-Man figures and going, these things look so odd. I couldn't quite place, what they were. Are these like Barbarian? Are they supposed to be more like Conan type figures? Or are they supposed to be more space, Star Wars, Star Trek kind of figures? Are they supposed to be more army-ish type figures? Like, they were a little bit of all of that, which was the brilliance behind it, really. And what's funny is, again, it just goes to show that something that's cool, even if it doesn't have all that other promo push behind it, if it's cool enough and it looks cool enough, kids are gonna dig it. And right away, man, me and my buddies just latched onto these He-Man figures. Now, a short time later, they came out with the syndicated He-Man and the Masters of the Universe TV show. And once that happened, these things went just nuclear. These toys got so popular. And I loved He-Man figures. I played with them a ton with my buddies. And it was another one that I bonded with my young cousin John, because John was considerably younger than me. I was 6 and he was like 3 or 4 or something like that. But even he loved the He-Man figures because they were big enough for his little hands. You know, they weren't quite small like he didn't get into the really small stuff. He wasn't as much into the G.I. Joes and the Star Wars figures, but these were bigger, more substantial guys. And then, of course, he watched the cartoon. I've got a few of them loose here. I've still got, I've had this all these years. I don't have too many of my vintage toys from my childhood. A lot of the stuff I have, I rebought over the years, but this is a remnant of it. I have this old Battle Cat. I'm missing his headgear, but I can't part with this. This is the original Battle Cat I had back when I was 9 years old. So I got that, and then this is a recent reproduction. But here, just to give you an idea, for those, I'm sure everybody knows, but for those that don't know, here's old He-Man. And that was what was so cool about him, was the fact that he, like I said, he had this barbarian look to him, but he had this like outer space look to him. And so I'll get you a close up there of him. Yep, that's old He-Man. He came with his shield and his sword. And this was before we even knew about the whole "I have the power" yell and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, yeah, this is a great toy line. Again, when it first came out, it was pretty limited that summer. There was a handful of characters. There was a couple of vehicles. We had almost no backstory, really, about who these people were and their relation to each other. I remember the one that I was really enthused with was I loved Zodak for some reason. Probably because I was always into space, outer space kind of stuff. And to me, Zodak looked like an outer space guy. Zodak is the guy, if you look there, he's over to Man-at-Arms' right, your left. He's right in front of Tila. That was Zodak. Yeah, so those were the first figures. That was the only ones you could get at first, was He-Man, Tila, Zodak, Man-at-Arms, Stratos, Beastman, Skeletor, and Merman. And then there was those vehicles, and then later, I don't even remember. I don't remember Castle Grayskull being around in the summer of '82. Maybe it was. I don't remember seeing it. I just remember mainly seeing the figures and seeing like Battle Cat and the Wind Raider. I think stuff gradually came out through '82. But yeah, those were a big hit. We had such a plethora of amazing toys to play with that summer. And I'm not even done. Getting back to the chat. Yeah, I bought Man-at-Arms at Kmart. Yep. Oh yeah. I remember Kmart. Kmart was a big place for me in the summer of '82. I'll get into Kmart in a minute, especially once I start talking about Star Wars toys, because Kmart was a prime place to find stuff that summer. I loved going to Kmart. Who didn't love going to Kmart? Especially, think about it, in the summer of '82, or any summer in the '80s, probably even in the '90s, to be honest with you. Obviously, by that point, I was an adult, more or less. But Kmart in the summer, man, that was the place to go, because, and I'm sure for other people, it would have been Walmart. If you didn't necessarily have Kmart, you had Walmart. That was in... Now Walmart is everywhere, but back in the 80s, in the early 80s, it was more of a rural chain. It was in a lot of places. Like, I always went to Kmart when I was down south with my family, like in places like Kentucky and Tennessee and stuff like that. But up here in the Midwest, Kmart was the more ubiquitous place. Yep, toys, vinyl, and Atari. Yep. Yeah, and that's what I was getting at Kmart too. They're saying in the chat, I used to live practically next to a Kmart as a kid. Oh my God, Angie, I would have gone insane. My parents would have just been like locking me in my room because they would, if I lived, it was bad enough that I lived right down the block from a Jewel Osco, which had comics and toys. And then there was a Ben Franklin five and dime store back in the late 70s, early 80s that was just a few blocks away that had all kinds of really cool toys and stuff. But if I lived by a Kmart, oh my gosh, I would have gone nuts, man. But yeah, Kmart, like that was the fun thing in a summer like that, in a summer of 82, going to see a movie like E.T. and then going with your family to Kmart, getting like a Slurpee or slushy or whatever. What did they call it? Because Slurpee was obviously 7-Eleven, but they had at Kmart, they had the slushy type drinks there. Icy. It was icy. And they used to have their little cafeteria kind of thing there where you could get like hot dog and nachos and all that stuff, and then go find some toys. Man, Kmart food court burritos. Oh, wow. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's fun kid summer Kmart memories right there. And outside the Kmart, they used to have the little quarter driven rides you could do. They used to have like the little pony thing that you would, and sometimes they had the rocket or the little mini merry-go-round that you could only put like 2 or 3 kids on at a time. Those things were great. Oh, Jess just popped in, said Kmart Cafe was the best. I always got a cherry icy and a pretzel. Yep, exactly. Those things were so good. Yeah, and that's what I mean. It's, you know, people think now of Kmart and it's, you know, people look back and are like, oh, Kmart was kind of whatever, discount ghetto. I don't see it that way at all. I thought it was an awesome place with a lot of fond memories and a place you could get all kinds of stuff for cheap, which was great especially when you're 9 years old and, you know, begging your mom for an icy, a pretzel, and a toy, which I routinely did. I got some of my favorite toys from Kmart. So I see, what are you guys, boy, I'm missing all kinds of chat in here. Everything. Barbie. Was it Barbie loved He-Man's muscles you're talking about? His muscles made up for his lack of height. Yeah, he was a rather short little stout. I used to know a guy that, he's not around anymore. I used to know a guy in the music scene that worked for bands that looked like He-Man. Sadly, I mean, he was like a short, like real short. He was all brawny like that. And he had a pretty similar haircut too, which that was unfortunate. I always wanted to just go to him and be like, dude, do you really think the haircut's, it's bad enough you kind of look like, you know, like the dollar store He-Man, you know, you probably should do something about that hair, but he was a good guy. Anyway, well, speaking of, you're talking about Barbie and all that. Another thing that was a really big thing in the summer of 82 was Barbie. I mean, Barbie was still raging. I mean, Barbie was the #1 girl's toy in 1982, aside from Glowworm and My Little Pony and Strawberry Shortcake. Strawberry Shortcake was still kicking butt in 1982. In fact, they even came out. 1982 was the year they came out with Strawberry Shortcake cereal. Does anybody have any memories of Strawberry Shortcake cereal? Because I thought it was actually really good cereal. But anyway, yeah, Barbie, as usual, was always, you know, coming out with something new and trying to reinvent herself while still staying true to classic Barbie. And the one that came out, oh, wait, here we go. I had a whole bedroom dedicated. Oh, Megan, I didn't know you had a Strawberry Shortcake bedroom. That's cool. But the big figure, every year there was like a figure that would come out, or a doll, whatever you want to call it, from Barbie that was sort of like one of the main focus ones. You know, back in, what was that, 78, it would have been Malibu Barbie. Back in 1985, it was Peaches and Cream Barbie and all that. In 1982, it was the Pink and Pretty Barbie. That was like the big one that girls were seeking out. And as such, Pink and Pretty also had all kinds of like cool accessories that would come with it. There was a really cool, I think that was the same year they came out with, I thought this was being all into music and stuff. I was really intrigued with this, and I'm pretty sure that my cousins Chris and Cindy had this. There was a Barbie piano that actually was like a little electronic piano. and you would sit Barbie at it, but it was a little player piano that you could like hit buttons and it would play music and stuff. I mean, that's not a big deal now, but back in 1982, I thought that was super cool, man. Like that Barbie had a little piano that could actually play. I mean, I knew the doll wasn't actually playing the piano, but you know what I mean? It was making the music and stuff coming out of it. I mean, that was, this was early days of that kind of stuff. I mean, now you can get little things that are the size of the palm of your hand that can play in a whole entire library of perfect sounding music. Well, you didn't have that back in 1982. So anyway, they came out with the Pink and Pretty. That was a really big one for that year. Let's see, what did he say? Oh yeah, Triple T Arms in 1870 says my sister had the big Barbie head. Oh, the Barbie fashion head thing. Yeah, there was just a head and shoulders, and you could style her hair. That was huge, man. Those first, I think, I'm not sure when they first came out, but I remember that the one that came out in the late 70s was a massive hit. Every kid I knew, every girl especially that I knew, neighbors, classmates, relatives, everybody had that head because it had the Farrah Fawcett style hairdo to it and everything. And so all the little girls loved that. You could practice doing stuff to the hair. You could put the makeup on. I can only imagine some of the horror story makeup jobs that got put on those heads over the years by different kids. But they still do that. I think you could still get things like that. I'm not sure if Barbie still makes it, but I know I've seen it for like other properties, doll properties and stuff. That's pretty cool. So anyway, but then another Barbie thing I feel like it's worth mentioning because this was something that was really popular over the years that they came out with in 1982 was they came out with the Barbie bubble bath. And that thing was super cool too, man. Like it was an actual bubble bath. Like you could actually put the doll in there. You could put bubble bath stuff in there and you could pump it and it would create like this whole hot bubbly bath for her. And it had the thing so that you could shampoo her hair and all that. Like that's pretty neat, man. I always loved these kind of toys. I played with Barbies and Kens a lot, again, because I was always playing with my cousins and neighbor kids and stuff. And I was always infatuated with how awesome these toys were. I was a little jealous, to be honest with you, because I would be like, I had Mego action figures. I had Superman figures, and I had Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock. And we had some cool accessories, but by and large, the male action figure dolls and stuff didn't have the same kind of accessories, not to the same amount and with the same kind of neat little tricks to it that things like Barbie had. Barbie had awesome stuff, man. I mean, I was just so jealous of all these things. Oh, you mentioned in the chat right now, Barbie camper. That camper was awesome. They came out with a camper and a remote controlled Corvette and the Barbie Dream House. That thing was massive and it was so cool. And I was always like, why don't they make things like this for my figures? That came later, a little later, especially once they started doing like the G.I. Joes in the 3 3/4 inch size. I think they started realizing, okay, we can do more accessories now. And then that's when you started having all the Eternia play sets and the USS Flag, aircraft carrier, and they started doing more of that kind of stuff and applying it. But back in the 70s and the early 80s, man, Barbie was just the queen of having the most awesome accessories. And yeah, that summer I could see something like the bubble bath playset being a really fun thing to play with in that hot summer, because water, it's one of those things. Take it out on the front porch and play with it out there. Don't get the house wet. Because I'm sure most kids probably took it into the bathroom and just made a mess out of the bathroom and had a lot of angry mothers. Not saying that by any, experience of mine. Not going to incriminate myself with my mother or any of my friends' mothers, but yeah, we were always messing up bathrooms with stuff, man. We were always just, anytime we could incorporate toys and water, oh boy. Yeah. So, I'm kind of winding down here. Just a couple of last things I want to talk about before I move on to some games. I've been mentioning my buddy David a lot. I always talk about Dave a lot on here and stuff because, you know, he was my best friend and we played with all these toys in this time period together. And a toy that I know, it was one of my favorites, but I didn't own this, but he owned this. And I know I can vouch for him because he's mentioned it on other chats here. That was one of his favorite things. And I'm pretty sure maybe he can correct me on this, but I am fairly certain that it was this year, it was 1982, when he got his hands on this play set. And it is none other than the Navarone 171-piece Fortress play set. Man, so essentially what this was, it was little plastic soldiers. The same old little plastic army men that have been around since probably the 1950s and stuff that Mark's company used to make. M-A-R-X, Mark's Toys. But they came out with this Navarone playset. Now, this was done in different iterations over the years, but in the early 80s, this was the one that was being sold in catalogs and all this 171-piece Navarone playset. This thing, oh my God, we had so much fun with this. You know, whether we played with it, sometimes we played with it with the little mat underneath, but oftentimes this thing got taken out into the dirt and the grass, and we, you know what I mean? Like, we took it outside and we would literally spend an entire day, and a whole afternoon at least, setting these guys up, coming up with different little missions and imagining stuff with this. We absolutely loved this play set, and that was by far one of the most played with toys that we had that summer. So I know that it's not just one that's specific only to 1982, but for us, that was a big one in the summer of 82. And I want to mention, since I'm talking about this topic too, along with that, there was, you know, those little plastic soldier guys were still quite popular, even though they'd been eclipsed by much more amazingly tooled toys, by like things like my Eagle Force and G.I. Joes and He-Man and all that. Even in the summer of 82, man, you couldn't discredit those little plastic little army men, man. Those things were still, we were playing with those like a ton, you know, and Fort Apache playset, all that kind of stuff. Well, but that summer, there was a toy that I bought specifically, and it is it's my white whale, you know, like it's my holy grail. It's probably in my top 5 holy grail toys. And it's so funny because it's not an in-demand toy. It's not even remembered by most people. And unfortunately, it's impossible to find because it wasn't like a major toy. That summer, my mom took me down to our boat in Kentucky, and she let me bring my buddies with. I think Dave went, and I know Robbie went, but I know I got to bring some of my friends with me. And the day we were leaving, we stopped at the Jewel Osco store, and on the end rack, I'm always talking about rack toys. Rack toys, especially back in the 70s and 80s, were such a thing. You know, I always talk about Brian Heiler's Rack Toys book, and I've recommended it and done a review about it on here. But rack toys were toys that you could find at the point of purchase, like when your mom was checking out at the cash register, at the grocery store, or at the dime store, or wherever. They'd have a rack there with a bunch of like cheaper, like $5 and under toys there, usually on a card, you know, like on a, you know, like on a action figure type card thing. But it could be bendy guys, it could be silly putty. That was a rack toy, you know. It could be jacks and balls. It could, all those kind of things. It could be a little pool set or something like that. They cheap toys. Anyway, this day we were getting snacks and everything for our ride down to Kentucky, and they had this toy, and it was an Apollo rocket, and it was red, white. I think it was red, white, and blue. And it was a big toy. It was, about now Dollar Tree's full of rack toys. Makes it, yeah, exactly. And yeah, exactly. I mean, there was always like a dollar store. Back then it was considered a 5 and dime store. Now it's a dollar store and so on. But and now there's $5 stores, like Five Below and everything because inflation. But anyway, there was this rocket. It was an Apollo rocket, and it came with a couple of, it was just plastic, and it came with a couple of little astronaut, plastic army guy, like astronaut guys. I think they were molded in white. And then it had this rocket, and the rocket itself was probably, now I haven't seen it in years. Mind you, I was 9 years old. So I'm sitting here talking about it going, it was massively huge. It was probably a foot tall. Probably, maybe. It probably wasn't that big. But it seemed pretty big. It was pretty substantial. And it was so neat because it was a rocket that it said USA and like Mylar stickers on the side, and it was like a rocket that broke off into different sections. So, like how a rocket does, when the first part goes off and everything. And the top part had a button that you could press that would launch the capsule part way up into the air. It had a really good launch to it. Now, this toy only cost maybe like, I don't know, $3, $5, something like that. Yeah, exactly. Like, to bring it up in the chat. Loved water rockets. Fill them up, and it had a pump, and it was the same kind of idea, but this wasn't a water rocket. This just worked on a spring that it would shoot off the top part. But it was the same kind of idea. So we saw it at the store, and I was like, oh, that's like super cool. And I talked my mom into buying it for us, and we brought it down to Kentucky for that little weekend or whatever it was, 4-day trip that we played with that rocket nonstop. We had so much fun with that rocket. We were shooting it off the end of the pier into the water. Of course, sometimes it was getting away from us, so we were having to use our fishing net to go get the pieces and come back and everything. We took it down because then we had a beach over there. We took it down to the beach. We were setting up at the beach. We were playing Planet of the Apes with it, pretending like the rocket, and crashed there and doing all. And we kept shooting off that thing. I mean, this was I had toys that were worth, way, way more than that at the time. I had a mountain of toys, and because I was a spoiled kid. But like, I got this toy just on a whim, and me and my buddies on that summer trip, it was the summer of '82, we had so much fun with that Apollo rocket toy. And it was just blister carded to a skinny long card that was probably about 15 inches high. I just have such fond memories, and it didn't last much past that. I don't remember us having, I don't remember what happened to it after that, because it wasn't meant to last. It was a flimsy plastic kind of thing, and we just played with the living hell out of it during that week. So we may have still had it. It may have lasted the rest of the summer, maybe. I don't remember that clearly, but I just have very vivid memories of it. I cannot find that toy anywhere. I've been looking for it. I've found other ones that are similar, but I've never found the exact one. And I want that toy so bad because I have such amazing memories of it. Yeah, Angie says in the chat, sometimes it's simple toys that you have the most fun with, or bring you joy. Yeah, exactly. And I talk about that all the time. That's why I have such a fondness for the rack toys. I used to get things like that, or I would get Silly Putty, or I would get some of you guys might remember the little parachute toys. You would have a little molded guy like this, little plastic guy that was only, a few inches tall, and it had string and a plastic parachute, and you could ball it up and throw it up in the air, or throw it off the balcony, or throw it off the garage, or whatever, off the second floor staircase, and it would float down. I loved those parachute guys. And that was the kind of stuff that got a lot of play during the summer, because it was an outdoorsy type toy, and I loved it. Meg says they probably all broke since it was so cheap, and that's why you can't find it. Exactly. Well, that's what makes rack toys in particular so collectible, because a lot of guys like me, or a lot of people like me, remember these toys fondly now, but they weren't collected. They weren't collectible. These weren't Star Wars. These weren't Barbie. These weren't G.I. Joe. These weren't Cabbage Patch. These were just no-name toys that were made cheaply and meant to be played with and broken, and, they were expendable. And so they just don't exist. And that's why, that's what's amazing about books like that Rack Toy book. And you see all those Rack Toys. I mean, so many of those toys, you look at it and you go, I haven't seen this since I was, 5 years old, and now I'm in my 40s. And it's really amazing. Meg, you said, you got your nephew these Transformer guys from Dollar Tree, and he absolutely loved those things. He had the real ones, but he still loved the cheap guys. Yeah, and that happened a lot. That happened a lot, especially, back then. There was a lot. I mean, there still are now with places like Dollar Tree, but back then there was a lot of knockoffs. You know what I mean? Like, especially when things like Star Wars came out and Dukes of Hazzard and all those kind of things. You'd go into these dollar stores and you'd find a lot of knockoffs. It'd be a car that looked like the General Lee, but it wasn't the General Lee. You know what I mean? Instead of having the 01 on there, it'd be like 00. You know what I mean? And nobody had the copyright to the stupid Confederate flag, so anybody could put that on there, or they'd put a different kind of flag on there or something, and it would be orange. We didn't care, man. Like, I'd get that for $1, $1.50, something like that. And we would just play with that thing till it literally fell apart. Like, we just had so much fun. Anyway, sorry, I'm rattling off about this and stuff. So, Meg, you say you think you bought a few extra and kept them so you can give them to him as an adult. That is a brilliant idea. That's a great idea. I wish somebody would have thought to do that with the things of mine, but who knew, I didn't know, and they certainly didn't know that people still, that's why I do this show. My family, my mother sits there and says, I don't understand how you can still remember all of this stuff. From, like, how do you remember this minutia? And I do. I can tell all of these toys I'm talking about today, I'm not making it up. I can tell you, not only do I remember, that I got it in the summer of 82, I can tell you who got it for me. I can tell you what store I got it at. I can tell you all that kind of stuff. I remember this stuff because it made a huge positive impression on me. Anyway, so I guess I'd be remiss to start wrapping this up. I have to mention that, of course, what was still one of the biggest things in the summer of 82 is probably still the biggest thing for me and my buddies in the summer of 82. And that was Star Wars. That was Star Wars toys. Even though we were anxiously awaiting the next movie, which wasn't going to come out until the following summer, they were still putting out some toys from the movie that had come out 2 years earlier. They were still releasing figures, and they were the last figures to come out for Empire Strikes Back. And as you could see them on the screen there, those were four of not all of them, but four of the last ones. And I'm going to give them their original names because they changed the names later on. Up there on the left, you have Zuckuss. On the upper right, you have the TIE Fighter pilot. On the bottom right, you have the Cloud Car pilot. And then on the bottom left, you have 4LOM. Now, I know all you Star Wars nerds are going to say, that's not right. The guy down on the bottom is Zuckuss, and the guy on the upper is 4LOM. Okay, well, I've talked about this before on the show, but when these figures first came out, supposedly, they got them mixed up, and Zuckuss was actually supposed to be 4LOM, and 4LOM was supposed to be Zuckuss, so they've changed those names now. I still tend to call them by their original names because that's what they were in 1982, and that's what they're always going to be to me. But whatever. When it comes to the new figures, I'll call them by their quote-unquote proper names. But in the original figures, I'm sorry, the card says their name. I have them here because not only were these the figures that came out in the summer of 1982, they happen to be among my all-time favorite Star Wars figures that were ever released. I absolutely love the figures that were released in the summer of 82. Someday I'll do like a top 10 list of my favorite vintage Star Wars figures, and spoiler alert, many of these figures are going to be in that top 10. Oh boy. Okay. My mom just commented in the chat. She said, you can't remember to take the garbage out in the morning, but you can remember who bought you what toy and when and where it came from 40 years ago, LOL. Yes, I can. Screw the garbage. Anyway. So as you can see, like here, I've got one of those figures. This is now, according to current lore, this character's name is Zuckuss. But as you can see on the actual figure, they gave him the name 4LOM. And so you can see it right there, 4LOM. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm not going to call him Zuckuss. He's 4LOM. That's his name. It's right above his head, 4LOM. So back in the day, he was 4LOM. So I love that figure. Another all-time favorite figure of mine, which I know I'm in the minority of, is the Cloud Car Pilot. I have one here. And these are all on the original cards, too. These are vintage carded figures. So you could see this was when you could still mail away to get the 4LOM figure, because he was originally a mail-away guy, and then later they put him out on his card. And there's the back when there was only 47 Star Wars figures to get in the mail-away. So, yeah. I love the Cloud Car Pilot. I remember getting him. And speaking of Mom, I remember Mom bringing him home for me from Venture. She got it for me and surprised me with him one day after school, because I have a very nice mom that did things like that for me. It was a really bad day at school that day, too, so it was really nice she did that. And possibly my favorite Star Wars figure of all time is the Imperial TIE Fighter Pilot. Here he is on his original card. And I've got the little camera here so you can see down in the right corner. What's really interesting about this is, like I said, this was gotten sometime in 82. Now this is one I bought later in life as an adult collector. My original ones, I opened them up. I played with them to death, you know. So these ones I'm showing you now are not ones that I bought back in 1982. These were bought later. But what's interesting for those that can't see at home about this figure is there is a thing printed on the front of the card, an offer to mail away for an Admiral Akbar figure. So this was a character that was like, who's that guy? Because this was way before the movie came out. And you'll notice that it says free Revenge of the Jedi figure. As we all know, that is not what the movie ended up being called. It was called Return of the Jedi. But at first, it was being advertised as Revenge of the Jedi until George Lucas thought about it and decided that revenge was not a trait that the Jedi would have. Jedis do not believe in revenge, so he changed it to Return. And so that's kind of cool. It doesn't make it particular. I mean, these were produced in hundreds and hundreds of thousands, so it's not like super rare because it says Revenge of the Jedi. But as you see, there's the thing on the back. We didn't know who Admiral Akbar was at the time. Little did we know that it was all a trap. It's a trap. So, but yeah, and this is on a 48 back card, obviously. So this pictures basically most of this bottom row that is here pictured on the back were all 1982 released. Those were the last Star Wars figures to be released until the summer of 83, when they started coming out with Return of the Jedi toys. In addition to the figures, they came out with a bunch of other like really cool stuff that year. They came out with another thing that typical of me. I tend to like stuff that people generally don't like all the stuff that's super popular. I always like the oddball stuff. I loved the mini rigs. Now, mini rigs were Star Wars toys that were created. They were envisioned as being vehicles that happened in the Star Wars universe just off screen. That was the idea. Hasbro basically created them because they said we need to have more vehicles, more accessories and stuff for kids to play with. Most of the Star Wars vehicles were huge, they were X-Wings and Y-Wings and Millennium Falcons, and they were big and they were expensive, and there wasn't a lot of smaller vehicles that kids could play with their Star Wars figures. So they created, with Lucas's permission, they created these other vehicles. And that summer of 82, man, me and David played with these toys like crazy. We loved the mini rigs for exactly that reason. It was so much fun. And we came up with our own like imaginary stories revolved around them and stuff, because they weren't actually in the movie, and we imagined they'd be in the next movie. We thought for sure these things were going to be all over Return of the Jedi, and they weren't. We didn't know. So here's my buddy Bosk, as you can see here, and I've got him in the Cap 2. There were two that came out that summer. There was the INT-4, which was, as pictured, was supposed to be envisioned as being a Hoth vehicle. And then there was this one, the Cap 2, which I guess they were envisioning being something, judging by how they picture it on the package, there was supposed to be something more like a Bespin Cloud City thing. And I keep one of my Bosk figures in there because that's how they pictured him on the package, is that Bosk was riding. It's supposed, we imagined that this was supposed to be a vehicle that the bounty hunters drove around in to use to like capture their bounties, to capture people that they wanted to get their hands on and stuff. It had this cool feature on the back. Let's see if I can show it, that if I can get it to open. So see, it had this claw thing, so then you could put a figure in there and it could capture them. So, if it caught Han Solo, you'd capture him in the back there, just like that. And I love these things. I know a lot of people dismiss it and say, oh, it's not canon. It's not real Star Wars. I don't give a shit. We had so much fun. It was back in the days when we used our imaginations. So much fun with these toys. So anyway, those came out that summer. That was a big one. And last but not least, one that was really big that summer for my friends and I was the Micro collection. Those started coming out. They didn't last very long. I think they started coming out around the Christmas of 81. And they lasted barely through to the start of 83. And then they were gone. They did not sell well. And what the Micro collection was there was kind of like predating things like like Micro Machines and some of those kind of things. And again, they were small lead type metal figurines with really cool play sets set up. So they ended up having almost more of like a model kit kind of vibe to them, and they were probably a little more appealing to the older kids, like myself that was getting, reaching 9-10 years old and stuff. And maybe even like some of the other like early teen kind of kids, because they didn't feel quite so little kiddie. And they were really detailed. They had awesome features. I know David and I loved playing with the Bespin set because they came out with all these to build a giant Bespin world. And you didn't have that for the regular figures. They didn't have a big Bespin World play set or a big Hoth World play set, although there were some Hoth play sets. So we played with these, and I was really bummed. I guess the timing was good because I wasn't into toys much longer after this, but I was really bummed that they didn't come out with stuff for Return of the Jedi. It was pretty much almost entirely an Empire Strikes Back thing, although they did make a Death Star play set. A couple things that threw back to the first Star Wars movie, but that was it. And that's all I'm really going to talk about. I mean, there was still tons of other Star Wars toys that were really big in the summer of 82, but those were the ones that were new for us that summer, and we had a ton of fun playing with. Real quick, I won't spend too much time. There is, I've talked a lot about dolls and toy and action figures and stuff. But one of the big things we played with that summer that just can't not be mentioned is video games. I mean, this is when video games really, really took off. And it was before the video game crash of 83 that they always talk about, you know, and before the resurgence later with Nintendo and all that. 1982 to me was sort of like the apex of the classic video game, especially the Atari 2600 video games. So I have a bunch of games. Sorry, I'm bending over to get them. You guys, for some of you that, I'm sure some of you grew up with these and some of you haven't, but man, these games, as you can see here, these are the old cartridges. There's my Pac-Man. I'm just going to feature the ones that were in particular really big. You know, I've done some, I remember just from my memory, but I've done reading on it, and the games that were really big that year were, that summer specifically, was Pac-Man, both in the arcade and even, this game gets knocked now, the 2600 version, because they say, oh, it looks so bad and everything. I get that, but you know what? When I was 9 in 1982, I didn't give a shit. I could play Pac-Man on my TV in my living room, and that was amazing. Another one that came out that summer that was a big one that year was Jungle Hunt. It was kind of the poor man's Pitfall, which I'll get into Pitfall in a minute. Yeah, there was games like Vanguard was a big one. There was Zaxxon was a big one. Defender was still really popular. One of the games that came out, not for the home console, but actually came out in the arcade and was, I believe, is considered to be the #1 game of 1982, especially of the summer, because I think it came out, don't quote me, but I think it came out in June, July of 1982, was my favorite, Miss Pac-Man. It was Miss Pac-Man. For people that sit there and go, oh, Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man, what's the difference? No, there's a huge difference. Miss Pac-Man was a much better playing game. I think it was a lot more fun than just regular Pac-Man. Not that I didn't love regular Pac-Man, but Miss Pac-Man was a great game. And even now, I think it was a year later that this came out on the 2600 console. I've got the game, the 2600 version game here. Even this was a marked improvement over the original Pac-Man 2600 games. So if you're ever looking to play old, you know, if you're ever doing retro gaming and stuff and you feel like playing old Pac-Man, you know, if you have an old 2600 or some kind of simulator or anything that has it, you could probably skip the 2600 version of Pac-Man, because, you know, it isn't very good. It was good enough at the time, but the 2600 version of Miss Pac-Man is actually quite good and it plays very well. But yeah, that was the big thing that year, was playing with those games. But not even just so, that was like at home. I guess I should mention it, huh? Is it not fair if I don't show it? I have E.T. Yes, I have the E.T., the extraterrestrial game. Listen, everybody, here's the thing. I'm going to debunk something right now. Everybody that sits there and says that, you know, oh, that's the worst video game ever made. Well, it didn't do well. There's been tons of documentaries. Even the Angry Video Game Nerd made a whole freaking movie about this, revolving around this and stuff. It didn't do well. The legend of what this game meant to the video game industry and to Atari specifically is well known. But this isn't a bad game. It's really not. It's actually a pretty tough game. And that was the biggest problem, is that it was hard. It was actually a hard game, especially for a 9-year-old kid. Those stupid pits that you would fall into, and just incessantly falling into those pits, and it was so slow to get out. That was a pain in the ass. I'm not going to say this game isn't a pain in the ass, but once you learn how to properly play it, because it was actually very advanced for an Atari 2600 game. This is actually a pretty cool game, because this came out at the same time as, right around the same time as the Raiders of the Lost Ark 2600 game. And that's another cool game, but it's a hard game. Both of these games were really tough. I think as adults, if you played this when you were a kid and you were like, oh, I think it sucks, revisit it. If you're into retro gaming, revisit E.T. and Raiders of the Lost Ark and give those games another chance, because if you actually read the instructions and you watch some tutorials and you learn how to play it, they're quite involved and they're pretty neat. I think they're good games. But anyway, the big games for me, I would say there were 3 big games that came out that year for me. One of them, of course, as I already mentioned, I would say this. I don't know if it's number 1. I can't rank these 3. There's 3 of them. I'm just going to leave them as they're all equal. Pitfall. I mean, that game is still a lot of fun. Did you ever play Pitfall, Megan? You don't remember? Yeah, you're too young, I'm sure, for this stuff. Pitfall was a lot of fun. It was a long game, which was awesome because a lot of the games on Atari 2600 back then weren't very long. It was a side-scroller type game, and it got a little bit repetitive, but it was a lot of fun. And it was a tough game, but not so tough that you would just give up on it. You know what I mean? Like it was the perfect game for a 9-year-old. Absolutely loved Pitfall. Another game that came out from what I consider to be one of the best Atari 2600 game developers was a company called iMagic, whatever. They came out with one of my all-time favorite games, Demon Attack. This was it was like taking Space Invaders to another level or so. Like it was the same idea where you were down on the ground and you were shooting up at alien invaders, but it wasn't so stiff and repetitive as Space Invaders was. The graphics, even now, it's been a while since I've played Demon Attack, but the last time I played Demon Attack several years back, I remember plugging it in and playing it and going, damn, man, I still think for what it is, for such a primitive type of game, I still think it looks good and it plays good. And if you're a retro gamer and you're into all that stuff and you haven't played Demon Attack, dude, play Demon Attack. It's not easy. It gets quite challenging as it goes on, and it's a lot of fun. It's a very intense game. Great sound, great graphics. It looks so much better than most of what else was coming out from the 2600 console at the time. And then if I'm going to pick a favorite, I guess I would probably pick this one as my favorite because it's the game I've played the most. And that would be Yar's Revenge from Atari. Now that I believe came out, I think that came out at the end of 81, but for me, I got it in 82, and all that summer, me and my friends and my dad, that's another reason I specifically want to mention this, because my dad enjoyed playing the Atari with me, which was pretty cool, except that my dad, if anybody ever wonders where I get my fly-off-the-handle temper about certain things from and everything, it's from my dad. It ain't from my mom. My mom's way cooler than me. I got it from my dad. My dad broke so many Atari controllers because he would just throw them, cursing, screaming and yelling. And yeah, that's where I inherited that from. But my dad loved Yar's Revenge, and so did I. And we both got really good at it. I've beaten that game. Honest to God. I mean, if I sit down, I could still do it. If I sit down and play Yar's Revenge now, I really want to put the time into it. I've sat down and played that game for like 8 hours. You know, like I've gotten crazy scores. I'm super good at that game. It's the only video game I'm good at, as Megan can attest to, because she's played video games with me. She's sitting here. You can't see her, but she's sitting here smirking at me right now. I know she's got visions of Mario Kart in her head. Ugh. There's video of that on our channel if you want to see me just crash and burn literally at Mario Kart. But anyway, Yar's Revenge. Man, that the summer of 82. So those games, and another one, I just remembered. I don't have a picture of it or anything here, a graphic of it, but another game that I got from Kmart in the summer of 82 was Haunted House from the Atari 2600. That's a really cool game too, man. And it's actually a little bit trickier than I've seen people kind of dismiss that game, but I think to really play it right and do it good, and play it on the higher levels, Haunted House is a good game. And it silly looking game now, I get it, but like when I was a kid, man, it was intense. So yeah, Haunted House, Yar's Revenge, Pitfall, and Demon Attack. Those were the 4 big video games for me that summer, because I was primarily not really going to the arcade, although soon I was going to the arcade and playing that Tron video game. Holy shit, one of the greatest arcade games of all time. And I hope I get to play it again sometime soon. I really got to get to Galloping Ghost. I've never been to Galloping Ghost Arcade in the Chicagoland area. Any people from Chicago that are into video games and stuff are going to probably just be like, "How have you never been there?" I've never been there. I still need to go. So I hope they've got a working Tron game there, because that was another great one from that year, from back then. But anyway, spent a lot of time at home on the couch in my house and my buddies' houses and stuff, playing these games. So much fun. And one last thing I want to mention, and speaking of games, is a game that my grandmother bought, of all things, because she couldn't play it, but she got it for me to play, and I would play it with her. My grandmother was quadriplegic. She couldn't use her hands for the most part and everything. So we would play games. I would have to do all the moves and stuff like that, and we would play Sorry and all these different games like Trouble and all these games. But the game that she bought was Merlin. I don't know if any of you guys out there remember Merlin. And it was this little handheld game, as you could see. He's mint in the box, so I'm not going to take him out of the box right now. But there is Merlin. And you put, like, I forget, 4 or 5 AA batteries in it, and it was pretty basic. It had you could play tic-tac-toe on it, and you could play like memory, kind of like Simon, where it would do little patterns and you had to match it, and it would keep it. You could do things almost more like a seeking game, like it would pop up. You'd have to remember where, try to like find where it was. It had several different games that you could, it lists on the back. It'd probably help if I just read the back, right? Tic-tac-toe, music machine, which you could actually make little music, because at each little pad there is, 11 pads, and they would make their own tone. So you could record little songs that you'd make up on there. Echo, which was basically the Simon type game. Blackjack, you could play blackjack on here against the thing. Magic Square, form a square of 8 lights by breaking Merlin's secret code. And then Mindbender, discover the computer's mystery number. This game of logic is the ultimate challenge. To win, you'll have to read Merlin's mind. Ooh-ha. So anyway, yeah, this was a game that my grandmother got that year, and I spent a lot of time over at my grandmother's house during that summer, and we spent a lot of summer mornings and afternoons sitting there playing these games together, and she'd tell me what to do and everything, and I have a lot of fond memories of that. That, as well as they had, another thing they came out with that year was they had the tabletop games, like of the video games. I had at least one of those. Do you guys remember these things? I've got them up on the screen now. They were lit. I think, summer of 82 was, it was when they first came out with the little tabletop versions of games like Frogger and Pac-Man and Galaxian and stuff like that. Those games, they've got them out again. Now you can get new versions of these tabletop games that look way better than these things did. But even so, these Coleco games, they were so much fun. They had little handheld. Coleco made the little handheld like football games and stuff. I've talked about it on the channel before. But these desktop games, man, thought they were so cool. I remember my buddy brought his Pac-Man one to school one day and got in trouble because he shouldn't have been bringing that into school. But we snuck it out at recess and we're playing with it at recess and stuff, and we had a great time with it. Anyway, so, yep, I'm at the 2-hour mark because that's about right for me. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff I skipped over even that we could have talked about for the summer of 82 toys. But I encourage all of you, even now that the show's over, join us over in the Geeking Squad group on Facebook. It's free and easy to join. Just go check it out and ask to join and start posting in there. We welcome everybody in there as long as you don't act like a jerk. No politics, no religion, none of that baloney. We just talk about toys and comics and food and movies and TV and all the fun, nerdy stuff that puts a smile on our faces. I encourage you all to join us over there and, let me know any memories you have. And if there's specific other stuff, like if there's any memories of certain summers or certain eras or certain toys that you want me to feature here on Toyetic, please let me know. I'm always looking for input on it. I'm waiting for when I can get everybody on board. I've been talking about I'm going to do the Funko episode. I think the plan is we're going to do that soon, right? I'm going on vacation tomorrow. We've got Pierogi Fest is happening in Whiting, which is a big thing for me and our co-host Matt, because hint, hint, Matt is Mr. Pierogi for those that don't know. So, and I'm performing until I drop dead basically at Pierogi Fest, because I'll be performing every single day there. It's going to be a hot one. Once all that is done, so probably looking at early August, something like that, we're going to do our Funko episode. I know Meg's eager to talk about it. She's got some new stuff to feature. I think we all do. Matt's got some really cool custom-made Funkos to show off. So that episode is going to be coming up soon, and shortly after that, I've got a couple other things I want to talk about. We're going to be getting back into talking about our music stuff soon. We've got a whole bunch of stuff, and Angie says, glad I caught at least an hour of the show. Have fun, Larry. Thanks, Angie. And, again, if you get bored later, this will be archived and it'll be up on the channel. So if you want to watch the first half and see what you missed, you're always welcome to. That's why I do it this way. That's why I prefer doing it on here as opposed to somewhere else where it's just one and done. And then if you missed it, you missed it. I like to keep everything here on YouTube so people can refer back to it if they want to. I know we didn't see a bunch of our friends. David isn't on here, and George isn't on here, and Joe and Carrie aren't on here. So I'm hoping all you guys, all our regulars, will catch catch this in a replay and everything. And as I said, we encourage you to pipe in with your thoughts on all this. Thank you to everybody who did join us in the chat today. It always makes me really happy to see you guys show up for this, because we don't have a big following like most channels do, but we have an awesome following. We really love all you guys that join us in this. You guys are our friends and family and stuff. So thank you so much. And I'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.